Today I'm talking with Noah Healy, and you're a pro algorithm developer and an expert on game theory and marketplace design. And I understand you're the founder of CoreDisk, which creates better marketplaces for commodities exchanges. And you even developed a patent to supersede commodity markets. Tell me more.
Well, that's all correct up until I've only applied for the patent. The patent office is being very obstreperous about the whole thing. It might be the first time in U.S. history anybody's had quite this contentious a path, at least with these specific actions. But yeah, at base, I've been interested in computational mathematics for around a quarter of a century now, and I was working on a relatively classic information communication problem and had a new approach that I wanted to try out, and from a couple of conversations and ideas put me onto the notion of trying to make a marketplace out of it. And it turned out that after I'd done the math, built the algorithm, actually wrote code and tested it, that the system was way better than the system we actually have. So that put me on this path of learning how to explain abstruse and obscure concepts from the last century of mathematical development to everyone on Earth, basically.
And tell me, how is it better? How's your system better than the existing system?
So the existing system relies on competition to keep itself honest, but it can't focus that competition, and so it essentially makes everyone within the system compete with everybody else. So it has only two roles. It has buyer and seller. And the people that operate the marketplace operate as buyers and sellers. The people that use the marketplace for their actual business operate as buyers and sellers. And the people that trade within the marketplace and allow it to function operate as buyers and sellers. But those four groups are very distinct, with very distinct interests and very distinct roles in the economy. And so what you get is this sort of, rock, paper, scissors thing where sort of everybody wants to trade with the people at the edge of the system because they're the worst at doing it, and so you make the most money trading with them. And nobody wants to trade with the people at the center of the system because they're the best at doing it, and you lose the most money when you're trading with them. And it turns into this big, dog chasing its tail type of fight, to try to get away from actually just having an economy, having trade occur. So I found a way to separate these things and create interest-based niches within a structure where a person can still have multifarious interests, but they now, rather than only having two choices, buy, sell, and the number that they attach, they now have three different doors they can go through. And the operator, rather than engaging in like buying and selling and sometimes wanting to and sometimes really rather would not, is now simply administering over a system with a set of completely automated algorithms that can process that information with a lot less time and energy.
And so just for people who may have joined us who might not have like an umbrella understanding of what we're actually talking about. So commodities markets, what qualifies as a commodity? Like what is
So,
being bought and
sure.
sold?
So a commodity is a product of uniform quality. The commodity that people are probably most familiar with in their day-to-day lives is like McDonald's hamburgers, but that's not really a market commodity because only McDonald's is allowed to make those. But the beef, assuming they're still using that to make the McDonald's hamburgers, would be another example of a commodity. Wheat, rice. There's what are called the softs. Wood is sold by large numbers of board feet in different grades. Then there's purely industrial commodities like steel, copper, iron, nickel, things like that.
So a lot of things that could be grown on a farm or could be made with an industrial process, and then also I hear about regulation in terms of like crypto. Is there any of those that would qualify as a commodity or?
Interestingly, the word stock or stock market is the same root as the word livestock or stockyard. The markets that we use to trade things like IBM or US government bonds or yen for euros were all based on the same model that we use for commodity markets. So what what you do when you're buying a share of Facebook or Microsoft is that they have set their company up to be made out of these commodified shares. So it doesn't matter, Bill Gates owns share number 1 and you own share number, 1,000,000,007, but they both get paid the same and vote the same. Aside from, special shares and other things, that the world become a much more complicated place. But within the common shares, every common share is the same. Like if your common share is 007, you don't get special privileges. It's just that's what the number is. So commodity markets are in fact a very general type of marketplace that we base everything on. And the reason that we do that is that once you create a standard, anybody can access it. So on the one hand, if I go out and grow wheat that meets the standard, I can now sell more wheat into the system. But on the other hand, if I want to open up a new business, rather than having to learn the intricacies of the local production of the kinds of iron ore that come out or something, I can buy machinery and design new machinery that is built to these standards. And that is why we are even capable of having a complex and interlocked economy with all the wealth around us, is that these standardizations mean that for every buyer, there's basically an infinite number of potential sellers. And for every seller, there is basically an infinite number of potential buyers. But that makes the process of negotiation, like I've been at the Chinese silk market and had to argue about a scarf in 2 different languages with a pocket calculator. And I was arguing about one scarf with one person. If I was trying to buy scarves in general from everyone on Earth that had scarves, well, everyone that was trying to buy a scarf was sitting next to me, and we were doing that, it never would have worked. So creating systems that can actually corral and define that large cacophonous transaction are important. And that's become even more important because now that we have the internet, it's not even so much the case that we have so many more people, because that was already being drawn in. We now have autonomous systems. We have robots that have joined the chat and are also shouting over each other and over us. And that's what's really breaking down the system as it currently stands, is that our voices, which actually have interests, are being drowned out by machines that really don't.
So in the marketplaces that you're redesigning and working with the patent office, is an ongoing concern about. But in these in this redesign that you've done, right, it applies to, sounds like, very vast number of potential marketplaces. It could be the stock market. It could be like traditional like commodities like corn and wheat and beef and steel. It could be it sounds like it's wide open in terms of applicability.
Potentially, yes. So there are about 30 major traded commodities in this country that comprise probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $6 trillion a year in annual value. And And if we keep having our inflation rate, that number will go up with the inflation rate, because we collectively need all that for our food and shelter and clothing and air conditioning and, summer trip and everything else.
Yeah, and so help me really understand. So what I heard you say is we're this new marketplace, paradigm that you're developing is not just trading at the edges, right? So it's not just like where the lowest price is that the sellers are competing to get to, right? The worst sellers are competing to get to the lowest price as fast as possible. And then the best buyers are competing to buy at that lowest price. How does it match people outside of those margins? Help me understand as someone who's new to this.
Well, sure. Well, the basic idea is that the deal, whatever the deal's on offer is comprised of information. And we've learned a lot about how to break down information and combine it together. And so what my system does is it creates a two-step marketplace. There's a negotiation phase where people come together and declare where they think that centralized deal is going to be for not just tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but for as many days into the future as they think that they have information. And then the system integrates all of those impressions together to come up with its composite of basically what the right answer is. And the integrations basically are additive. So tomorrow, we'll have what everybody's impression was yesterday of what the day after tomorrow, but now tomorrow and next week and next month and so on, that we can now integrate more information into. And as this system produces a stream of daily deals, as it were, those deals are then turned over to this settlement marketplace where supply and demand come together. And so the goal of the negotiation is to find not the lowest possible price, not the highest possible price, but the price at which the most valuable trade will occur. Because trade will basically occur at any price you care to name. If wheat cost as much as gold, somebody would be starving enough to buy a little bit of it. And if gold cost as much as wheat, somebody would be desperate enough to sell a little bit of it. But there's a price at which billions of tons of this stuff will get bought and sold, and that will make everybody the most possible money. And so the clearinghouse measures how well this negotiation marketplace is doing, and it does that by producing a income stream from the commissions that are charged on the clearances and the trades that actually happen. And those commissions pay off the people based on how accurately their information was in integrating into the system. So accurate forecasters, accurate negotiators get high rates of return for providing information to the broad market consensus that then essentially just gets to sort of act like they're the grocery store. You go in, you got a price, you decide how much you want, you take it off the shelf, and that's it. You walk out and leave your money behind.
It's interesting because what I'm hearing actually relates to when I walk into a grocery store. There are times when I'm thinking ahead of time, like, okay, if this protein bar I want to get is $1.99 or less, I'll buy it. And if it's not, then I'm gonna skip it today. Or if this certain juice that I like is on sale for $2.99 or less today. If I can get two for $6, I'll buy it. But then if I go in and see it's not on sale, then I'm gonna wait. So is that a little bit of an analogy? Another thing is I'm thinking, like, how does it work on the dashboard? Like, do people input information like today I'll pay this, tomorrow I'll pay this, and they input like a calendar of predicted prices that they might buy or sell for ahead of time?
So yeah. Yes to both, but just go to more detail. So in the first case, what you're describing there is the precisely ordinary human response to price information and the entire purpose of price information. If everything in the store cost a penny, then the first people that came in would clear out all of the champagne and caviar and prime rib. And then the second people that came in would clear out, whatever the second tier is. And then by early morning, the people that were tottering in by then would be looking at an empty store as there was nothing left. And so what price does is it moderates that demand. You're like, I like pineapples, but this isn't really in my budget right now. I'll wait for it to go on sale. Or maybe it is in your budget right now and you pick up a pineapple. And by doing that, the pineapples go to the people that want them and can afford them. And that funds the continuing production of pineapples so that there will be pineapples, tomorrow, maybe when they're on sale. And so in terms of what you put in, that's pretty much exactly what you put in. You can put in your own personal desires. You can also try to think more globally and think about where you think desires are going to go. So one thing you can do if you're one of these edge users, if you're, somebody that owns a farm or owns a factory, you could say to yourself, well, this is the good price. Like, this is the price that I'd like. But what's the bad price? Like, what would happen if the price was lower than that? I'm a farmer. If the price was lower than that, I might, I'd still trade, but I wouldn't be as happy about it. I'm not making as much money. I could bid a little lower. And then if it turns out that the price actually is a little lower, I'll make more money on my prediction, and that'll make up some for not getting the price I want out of the other thing. The factory owner can do the same thing in reverse. They can bid a little higher, and then they can make some back on that side of things if they're wrong. And then they'll lose a little bit if the price comes in where they want it to come in, but then they're making more money actually selling. So there's different levels that you can get into of deciding what you want. But the important thing to understand is each person has those preferences, has those ideas about what they're willing to buy, what they're willing to sell. And because the marketplace is the point of meeting in the middle set of all people's preferences is the answer that is the right answer, is the answer you're actually looking for. So even if people choose to lie, even if they're not even thinking in terms of their own long-term interest, there's like, well, I think this is what the answer is, but I don't want other people to know what I think. So I'm just going to roll some dice and add or subtract a random number from that so people don't really know what I'm thinking. Well, all that will average out too. And so whether people are just wearing their heart on their sleeve or leveling up and trying to think ahead of maybe, playing the angles, or just revealing a little bit but trying to hold back some information because they don't want other people to exploit them. Once you get enough people in the system, all that noise just integrates right out of the number. And what you wind up with is what actually everybody's willing to agree to. And beyond that, anyone who can look at these things or forecast these things can just go ahead and make the best money they can by putting in that number as quickly as possible. So the system equilibrates quite a.
And so when I've developed projects and then I had, for example, I know there's going to be bugs in anything I've built, like software, right? And so what I used to do before my son went off to college, so I'd have my son test it, and he'd say, "What do you want me to do?" And I'd say, "Try to break it," right? And he'd go in there and he'd find 10 ways to break it, and I'd take it back to the team and say, "Hey, let's fix this." So if I was playing my son in this case, right, and my goal was to break it, right? So my question to you would be what if I spammed the system with a bunch of zeros or infinity numbers? If I was trying to just be a bad actor
Sure.
and come into the system and say a bunch of weird numbers.
In order to negotiate, in order to enter into this negotiation market, you also have to back up your guess with money. And the amount of your information that gets integrated is based on the amount of money that you have. So if you try to go, in this system, 0 and infinity are basically the same idea. Prices can't really, go to either of those extremes. And so if you're trying to put a price to 0 or put a price to infinity, we'll take however much money you're willing to back that guess with and integrate all of that into the system. But you will run out of money before we hit infinity or 0 with whatever you're doing. And because the money that you're putting into the system is being held in these pari-mutuel pools, what you've basically just done is paid for somebody else to fix your mistake. And so, number one, if you're sort of a lone voice in the wilderness doing this among a large group of people that's all sort of doing the right thing, because the system is integrating towards these medians, one outlier will have virtually no effect, and mostly will have absolutely no effect on the actual prices. And so your money will essentially just get scattered among people that were acting in good conscience and actually made the system work. But if you're able to have so much money that you can outbid basically an entire economic segment, or if you're in some sort of collusive behavior where you're able to put many, many, many of these things into the system, which again is ridiculously expensive, at that point, what you're doing is producing an opportunity for people to take your money away from you. And so anybody that knows that that's what's happening now has this very effective mechanism of making themselves an enormous amount of money at basically 0 risk by simply recapitulating whatever the system currently or had previously said was basically the right answer in order to put themselves on the right side of taking your money from you. So, those sorts of spam attacks will have very little impact on the system as a whole.
So my understanding now is that like people come to the platform or and they want to place a bid, right? But they have to put actual money in, or if they want to sell something, have to put up the actual asset, right?
So yeah, there's 3 different things. So if you want to negotiate and you want to put information into the system, you have to have some sorts of information and you have to have money to back that. If you want to get involved in the clearinghouse, you would have to either want to buy and have currency, or you'd have to want to sell and have product. And so, people attempting to buy or sell without actual, product or money can be treated like any other fraud. If you went to the grocery store and bounced a check, that wouldn't work out very well for you. Or likewise, if a company was trying to sell plastic instead of food, that wouldn't work out very well for them.
What's the closest so this is a new thing, right? So it's going to be tricky for some people to understand what you're getting at because it's new. What's the closest thing that would make a really easy to understand example of what your new system does? What's the simplest way if I'm a 5th grader?
Sure. Well, I am still working on that one, but for right now, my sort of easiest thing is sort of noise canceling headphones. The purpose of the marketplace is to boost signal and reduce noise. And so when you have on noise canceling headphones, it's recording ambient sound, and it's producing a sound that's reverse phase from that, so you can't hear ambient sound. But those things have an upper limit. If you have noise canceling headphones, like the ones that the controllers use on aircraft carriers and are standing next to jet engines, well, that allows them to continue to be able to hear in their civilian lives, but that doesn't allow them to hear when they're standing next to a jet, like the power of the waves coming through their chest is enough to overwhelm their hearing. That's what markets are doing. They're taking all of these disparate, passing fancies people have about whether or not they're going to buy this brand of coffee if it's on sale and all the rest of that, and distilling all of that down into one number of how much a ton of coffee is going to cost on the dock at New York. And what we've been doing with the internet is jacking up the noise level to degrees that nobody could have even imagined. And we can't really even particularly understand, nobody has ever read the internet. That's just not a thing. And so what this is a way more powerful noise canceling system to cope with our much more noisy environment that we live in today.
Yeah, I like that. That helps me see it visually, and even the feeling of the airplane, which is like another level of vibration outside of the sound wave level that the tiny receptors in your ear can hear. Your body can feel that helps to clarify, like, you're getting rid of the noise, and we're finding that price in the middle. So what have you built in terms of, like, have you built like a marketplace that does this?
So there is code that does this part of the algorithm. So price discovery is the critical service for marketplace, but there's a lot more to a marketplace than that. And regulatory compliance is a big piece of that. What's more, and that's the expensive bit. I have written the code. I have load tested the code. And in terms of load testing, you and I are currently using enough computational and communication resources to replace every single commodity exchange on Earth using this technology. The information and computational efficiency comparison to existing systems is off the charts. As you'd mentioned, I'm also pursuing the patent, and so I'm a pretty far way down that road. The patent office is being quite recalcitrant about the whole thing. And I have 4 different projects around the world that are seeking to actually build marketplaces that would incorporate the technology. And I continue to look for more people that would like to try to get that starter seed up out of the ground and into the sunlight.
So the blocker right now, it sounds like, is the patent itself. You're not there's not it doesn't make sense to actually build out the software until the patent is done.
Well, so there are people whose interest would become piqued by the presence of the patent. The people that are operating right now are operating under a international open source license. And they are all international players. The people ability to access a monopoly makes some of the people I've talked to more interested, whether or not they'd actually be willing to open up the wallet once that barrier gets passed is something I'd have to find out after I pass the barrier. But it would be a considerable upgrade in leverage to be able to have the patent to wave around. And so it is quite frustrating, particularly since they're operating in ways that are, it looks blatantly illegal, frankly, slow down the process and continue to delay.
And every time you reapply to the patent, you're spending money with lawyers, and you have to rewrite, you have to write new documents, you have to like create new, figures and designs. Is this correct? So it's very expensive
Well,
to
yeah.
reapply.
So we haven't really had to update the patent in any meaningful way since about 2018. However, there is still a lot of back and forth with the attorneys when these things occur. So in 2019, September 2019, I got my notice of acceptance. And once you get one of those, you can go apply for the patent. You get this ticket that says yes, and you've got this other thing that says, this is what the yes is pointing at. And you hand those to the teller, and they stamp, here's a patent. Except they ignored it. There is a procedure for withdrawing it, if the quality control team or, the NSA decides that this is national security or something. I mean, there's reasons and things why a patent that looks like it should be granted doesn't get granted. But just having them say, yeah, we, whatever, that's not something that really happens, except to me. So we'd applied for this patent. We had the acceptance. They didn't do it. We asked them what was going on, and they said, we have to figure that out. We'll get back to you in a couple months. So they came back and they said, you can't have it because it's useless. And so I had
That's
to,
weird.
I had to explain basic computational analysis to my attorneys, which was challenging enough, and pull together the research papers that exist that explain this to sort of laymen. To put this in context, there was a paper that was written in, I believe, 1984, where somebody had a supercomputer and a home computer perform the same task. The supercomputer was using an inefficient algorithm, and the home computer was using an efficient algorithm, and the home computer did it faster than the supercomputer. That's a huge upgrade. It's much better because home computers are obviously cheaper than supercomputers. They use a lot less electricity. You're making a physical improvement in the world, which is what the patent needs. So it took me a little while to, explain to my lawyers what the math actually says and find the relevant documentation in respectable locations and so on. But I was able to do all that, and my attorneys put together a fairly sharply worded, statement saying, if you want to defend 1 = 2 in court, we'll be happy to crush you. But if you don't want to defend 1 = 2 in court, we would like to have our notice of acceptance back. So in 2021, they gave me the notice of acceptance back. And then 3 weeks later, they withdrew that notice of acceptance. And this time they said that it was too good, that this would replace economics, like all economic activity. And that's too good. Now, my attorneys are not slouches, and they have relationships with the examiner and his boss. And so they were in conference with them, which cost me money. And what the boss said, what she said was, we're under orders from these people we're not allowed to talk about. Now, again, there's people that, they're legitimately not allowed to talk about. And of course, there's other people that they're illegitimately not allowed to talk about. And obviously, I can't tell which kind of people these are. But she's like, well, they told us we couldn't do it. This is the best we could understand of what their reasons were. We don't agree with this. This seems like nonsense to us. We think you should have the patent. But, it's not up to us. It's up to these people who you're not allowed to talk to. So I've got this rejection of a notice of acceptance, which has a reason which no public official will support. I had my congressman, or my congressional office anyway, investigate the matter. They were given a brief timeline, which left out the first notice of acceptance entirely, and a note saying that the patent office would never talk to them again, which the person I was dealing with has been a congressional staffer for 30, 40 years. He's never seen the bureaucracy ever respond to a congressional request this short, this delayed, this dismissively, or this falsely. Like, none of those things. So we appealed. Again, my lawyers wrote up an appeal. It looks pretty good to me. I'm not an attorney, but they are in violation of their procedures. Their claimed reason makes no sense on its face, and their public, people say so. We have jumped through all of the hoops as far as the hoops are defined. So I should be allowed to have the patent, but we'll see. In July of 2023, my appeal was scheduled to be heard in July of 2025. So I don't have a lot of legal expenses over the course of the next year, but but I also don't have a patent or any kind of progress over the course of the next year.
Wow. Yeah, it's this patent, the struggle to overcome the challenges to get this patent is it's a lot. It's a lot. I totally understand. I've actually applied for a patent myself, and I had struggles as well, and not to the level that you've had, but it's uh, it's very frustrating to say the least. And
It, it
what's keeping you going with that? What keeps you going? What keeps you in the knowledge that you're going to keep pursuing this patent?
well, the payoff, sad to say. Like I said, the markets that we presently have are drowning in noise. And so, I was born in 1975. I saw the flash crash of the late 80s. I saw the S&L. I saw the .com and the global financial crisis. I've seen 3 or 4 different Asian crises by now. I've been seeing all these boom and bust cycles. It's not like the marketplace isn't capable of boom and bust cycles, but historically speaking, people had experienced 1 or 2 of those in a lifetime. And some very long lived and very unfortunately, birth death people would see 3. We have people that aren't out of high school that have seen 5 or 6 of these things. So something is very different. And when you examine it, as I have, from a communication protocol algorithm point of view, it becomes very obvious to me that what's going on is the system is simply being outscaled. It can't cope with what it has to deal with. And unless we want to send all of our technology into the trash can, we can't keep these markets functioning. And my life is dependent on both of those things working. And so this is the only public declaration of a market design that can cope with the internet age. And unless somebody comes up with something that's either better or existing, more practical to get existing or something like that, this is the only game in town.
And so you mentioned other markets outside the US, right? Because you're applying for a patent in the US, is what I'm assuming.
Correct.
So you mentioned other markets like China or maybe some other countries who also face, a lot of noise in their markets, and this could be a huge improvement for them to adopt this new marketplace um, system. What have you done any like research into that, like as an option for maybe getting like a patent in China first, and then launching it there, or in a smaller market, launching it somewhere where you could more easily get a patent in that jurisdiction and then launch in that jurisdiction?
I've actually explicitly abandoned the notion of an international patent. So basically, anywhere you're not allowed to patent things after they're published. And when you apply for a patent in the United States, they publish it. You could, at that point, also pursue an international patent, or you could uh, pursue a patent in some other location and then go international from there. However, because I didn't do that for a few different reasons, it's already public. And so, as far as I'm aware, the idea would be unpatentable in those locales. One of the big reasons for doing it like this is that I don't really know what's going to sell better. And so, having an open source door and a patent door, if I can get a patent door going, creates 2 different sales opportunities for people that are interested in launching a marketplace. Now, it would be sort of the worst of all worlds if only people interested in the patent door were overseas and only people interested in the open source door were here in America and the patent was granted. But for right now, the open source door is the only one that exists, and the patent door may or may not come to exist. Another significant reason is that international patent isn't a thing. Nations have sovereignty, and while there is some streamlining, in order to get a patent in a nation, you have to go through the patent process of that nation. And so what you're doing is essentially multiplying the cost and expense across however many national jurisdictions there are. So if I truly did want to lock this entire thing up globally from the jump, instead of the tens of thousands of dollars that I would have spent, I would be spending millions to tens of millions of dollars globally. And that's, if I had that kind of capital, I would have gone through the process of actually launching a marketplace myself, and sort of bootstrapped on the back end, but I don't. So I'm doing this instead.
And so you mentioned the open source version of, which is, while you're waiting for the patent, that might be the only thing available to people, would be an open source version. So is that something that people are able to do now? Do you already have that code, like
Yeah,
on
yeah, yeah.
GitHub?
So there is code on GitHub that's under Creative Commons version 4. If you don't want to write any of your own code, you can grab that and start working on that. However, the patent itself and the white paper are published. You can get a link off my website and look at it online. I've done at this point hundreds of podcasts, and a few where I've actually walked through the process with diagrams with people. The core algorithm can be implemented in around 300 lines of any modern coding platform, which is a couple of weeks worth of work to knock out a rough draft, and for a person, and probably about a month's worth of work for a decent software team to knock out a fully solid, heavily tested, core component API type system. So it's not really that challenging, assuming you actually have the design documents, and as I said, those are all public.
Yeah, that's amazing, because people are building marketplaces. So I'm wondering now, I, how I could connect you, or how someone could connect you with people who are building these marketplaces, who are looking for these efficiencies. Like how they can reach you through your website, which is CoreDisc, right? COORDISC.com.
Yes. You can reach out to me directly. Noah P. Healy at yahoo.com is a highly monitored and not particularly spam filtered at this point email address. So you reach out. Connect to me on LinkedIn. I have a petition up around the patent office thing, and change.org under CDM_patent. And so if somebody doesn't have connections with somebody that wants to launch a marketplace, but simply wants to express a little solidarity or help or hope for the future, they can stick their name down on that thing.
Yeah, well, the promise of the innovation. It sounds like there's a huge potential gain to be had, right? To reduce all the noise and to reduce the computational power for a marketplace, to make the marketplace more efficient, to get the buyers and sellers to meet at the right price. So it sounds like this is something that's been driving you for a while, and this is a huge project, and it's going to keep going for a while. It's already another year from now, from this recording, till you'll get the next communication going through the patent office. So here on this podcast, we talk about your life, right, which is what we've been talking about so far, and I want to also include the fitness, family, and fun aspects of your life a little bit, right? So we all have different aspects of our life, and sometimes, and the goal is not to be like perfect in every aspect, but we just check in. We're just checking in, and it's a chance to talk about these are the things you're doing in different areas. So we just talked about finance stuff in your business. Let's talk about family. Like, do you have some family goals that you're pursuing? Like, where are you at with with your family, that component of your life?
Um, well, I'm kind of a loner, actually. Family for me is sort of the family I was born into, rather than any family that I built. And and so I I'm the oldest of six children. I have something like 40 cousins. Um, my last day outing was a cousin's child just graduated from high school, and so they were having a family reunion, and I was at that. And so I like, host Thanksgivings and Christmas Eve parties for the for the family that's in town and around Central Virginia. And that's kind of where I've been landing. The city is looking to have a lot of redevelopment, and I actually live in one of the places that just got upzoned. There's a fairly strong probability. There's a group of us neighbors that are trying to, you know, field offers that I would finally have to sell my home here, which I've been living here for decades. And if that were to occur, then I'd have to actually start thinking about like how my next home life design would function. Um,
So is it like an airport is moving in or something? Like, is there a reason why they're trying to buy up the houses, or is a freeway coming through? Or
they're not trying to buy up the houses. So I live in a property that was subdivided from a golf course that was subdivided from a farm. It's sort of a nice quiet street that's a little off downtown in a moderate sized town. As of February of this year, if I want to put a triplex in my backyard, I can. I can't afford to do that, but that's interesting. And if I'm willing to knock this house down, I can put two triplexes on this property, and so can everybody else that lives on my street.
whoa, that's different. I've never heard of this before.
Yeah, and that's a moderation, because when they started talking about this a year and a half ago, the plan was that we would be able to put four-story, 12-unit apartment buildings on our properties.
So the reason why this is developed is because it's a subdivision of a subdivision, and so now they're like, we're gonna build up in
The
this area.
Yeah, the city's been frozen in size for about 40 years now. So the town I was born in had just under 40,000 people in it. We're now, I think, closer to 70,000 people. But when I was a kid, when you stepped over the border, it was farmland, and now when you step onto the border, it's apartment buildings. And so the city would like all those people that are living a stone's throw away from the border to move downtown and start contributing to their tax base instead of the county's tax base. And they're looking around, they're like, well, there's no more places to put housing. Like we've been building on cliffs for a quarter of a century here. So they were like, well, we'll just take some of the housing that already exists, that's next to the nice parks we've been making, that has access to roads that get you out of town. And so they found about between 5 and 10, so about 7% of the city that met their qualifications, and they just said, "Yep, instead of single-family residences, you can have four or six families, depending on whether you keep the house or knock it down."
Wow. So now, did some developer come in and offer loans to help with this, or is the city partnering with some sort of development group to help make this happen financially?
There's a lot of speculation around town about what might be really driving this, and if that is happening, it's happening under the table.
But I imagine if you see people starting to build housing, one of your first questions might be, how are you affording this?
Yeah, yeah. Well, just a few blocks away, actually, the first one of them has started. Um, Somebody is in fact putting a triplex in their backyard.
So you'll get to see how it plays out. And I think the question is not only, where are they getting the funding to build that triplex, but also, like, will people actually move in? Is there that demand that's predicted? Um,
Yeah, these are the open questions. Charlottesville has a lot of drawing power with UVA, and an increasing number of people coming from around the country. It's a sort of a popular place for people to retire to sort of, we have a large number of people that were working in Silicon Valley or New York when COVID hit, and they didn't want to live in cities anymore, but they still wanted the sort of cultural amenities that come with cities. Universities do a lot for the cultural amenities of a location without also producing a lot of people, and so that combination makes this and similar types of medium-sized university towns very popular for that, and they're leaning in hard. And sure, it would raise the expense of living here considerably should that start happening. At which point I'd probably have to sell up and come up with some new life plan.
Where do you think would be the place that you'd ideally like to land if you were going to pull up your
I
roots and move
I
north?
haven't thought hard enough for ideal, but I'm in Charlottesville because I like towns. So that would be that would be my focus. I'm also a big fan of books. Charlottesville is one of the most bookish places on earth, but again, the internet has made library access considerably easier. So you're not, from my perspective, going to a cultural void basically anywhere in the country anymore. So there's a lot of potential options on the table if that would come to pass.
So it sounds like we're transitioning into the fun part of it. So your hobbies that I'm hearing, like you like books. What are just broadly? What are some of the hobbies that you enjoy?
Math, books, the occasional movie, and some light exercise, taking walks, things like that.
Let's save the exercise. Yeah. Okay. So book, math, and movies. So let's hear it. What kind of books are you drawn to?
Uh, I'm a big fan of Silver Age science fiction and juvenile fantasy. So I have extensive collections of both of those things, along with some other sort of ancillary similarity pieces. But I'm pretty broad-minded in my book selection. I read a lot of nonfiction textbooks and other similar types of things, mostly in math, but also in some other subjects, along with a few other types of historical fiction and those kinds of things.
So if somebody were to ask you, what's a book that you've read like you've read it many times, and you keep coming back to it. It's a book that you really enjoy that you could recommend to others. What would be like your top three books that you really recommend for enjoyment?
So I generally recommend books based on what I know about a person, but I did get this question recently, and so I think I would go with The Shockwave Rider by John Brunner, Small Gods by Terry Pratchett, and Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson.
Yeah. Yeah. So the Shockwave Rider, I haven't heard about that one. What is? Can you tell me more about that?
Brunner is criminally unknown, sadly. He was a British sci-fi author of the 60s, 70s, 80s. I think he died actually sometime in the 90s, on the youngish side. He got a Hugo for a book called Stand on Zanzibar, which also really reached hard into this writing style that he created, that is in somewhat evidence in the Shockwave Rider. But the Shockwave Rider is inspired by a guy named Alvin Toffler's ideas that as the modern world continued to become more and more modern and that the pace of life and change would accelerate, the same kind of culture shock that travelers could experience could start happening in the day-to-day lives of people, of what he termed future shock. And this, of course, would be significantly more serious because, kid that's going off to college and, suffers some sort of cracking depression can go home and refamiliarize himself and get back what he's lost and perhaps, come back stronger, or at least understand something about the limits of what they're capable of. And the same thing for, a tourist that finds themselves confronted by toilet paper free bathrooms in Central Asia or something. But if you were to experience such a thing because the world itself had changed due to the passage of time at paces and in ways that you personally just couldn't keep up with, there's no return, there's no back there, because of course time marches for us all. So he combines this idea with internet technologies, which were in a very early stage. The book's written in, I believe, or came out in 75, and posits this idea of, if information technology exists and becomes ubiquitous, who are the elements of society that are harmed? And Brunner's answer is organized crime, because if everybody can know anything, then secret conspiracies to do bad things become very easy to discover and punish. And the government, because if everyone can know everything, then one of the primary services of government just vanishes. And so he posits a world in which organized crime and the government join forces, anarchic over lawful chaos, in order to keep people so off balance and off kilter that they can't formulate functional lives that would enable them to resist the power and force of the state and criminality. And our hero is a man named Nicky Haflinger, who is this naturally gifted hacker, who is attempting to overturn the entire system. And he is so gifted that he can write himself a completely new identity with access to any phone in the world. And we open up with him having already been captured in his attempted rebellion, and being wired into a frame so he can't physically move, and having his memories from his brain replayed by his interrogator. And so this is the position from which he now must successfully launch a functioning rebellion against the superstate.
Whoa. Yeah, it starts out with the highest stakes you can imagine. That's amazing.
Yes, yes, it is a fantastically well written book. It's an enormous fund of ideas. He predicts computer viruses and notions of privacy that we are still not even addressing publicly to this day. And it's a real eye opener. One of the handful of people who had actually read the book before I started talking to them about it was one of my grad student TAs when I was in college, and her impression was that it wasn't science fiction at all. That was that's the truth. That's the universe we actually live in. It's just that we hadn't quite caught up yet. This was back in the 90s.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, that sounds really good. I have to check this out. The Shockwave Rider, Frank
Yes.
Bruner. Yes. I've read Treasure Island, and I absolutely recommend it as well. And Small Gods, tell me about it, because I've tried to read Terry Pratchett books before, and sometimes you read a book and you're like, I'm gonna hopefully enjoy this, and somehow it just like ejects you, like it doesn't, you can't get into it sometimes. How Tell me
You're
about
the
this.
second person I've heard of that has had that response to Pratchett, and the other person claimed that they had an issue with the sort of zany silliness of Pratchett, which I have a hard time sort of comprehending myself, because I find it so charming and laugh out loud funny that I can't really wrap my head around that. But Small Gods is a standalone in his Discworld novels. So he wrote, I guess he's dead now, sadly, um, a few dozen novels that are all satire and fantasy, and satirizing fantasy and many other things. on this world he created called the Discworld, was a flat Earth that's sitting on elephants that are standing on a turtle. And Small Gods is very standalone. Most of his things belong to one of several series that are around some central cast of characters that actually develop from book to book. But Small Gods is set in a kingdom called and that kingdom worships a god named And worshipping gods isn't very rare in Discworld because at the center of the disc is this very tall mountain that goes all the way up into the sky, and the gods live up there. And in general, the gods respond to atheism with lightning bolts. So there's not a lot of atheism in the Discworld because the gods don't put up with that kind of stuff. But gods are plural. Everybody knows that they're all real. But has managed to convince his followers that there's only one true God, that he's it. And so this very sort of medieval Catholic type religious theocracy exists in and controls everything. And one day, this fairly simple, low-level cleric named Brutha hears a voice in his head, and it's the voice of has made a pilgrimage. The part of the biblical tradition of is that they have prophets, and their prophets actually come on schedule. Every like couple centuries, there is a prophet of and so Am's coming down to Earth to contact a prophet. But to his horror, he discovers when he gets there that nobody believes in the God anymore. They only actually believe in the church. And the only person in the entire world that still believes in him is this one fairly simple cleric. And so he's stuck. He's now not a true God anymore. He's a small God. And so he's dealing with this practical problem of how to restore his own godhood, and also how to protect his one and only worshiper through the political machinations of what's going on. And so Brutha winds up becoming embroiled in a war with a neighboring kingdom that is very much based in ancient Greece, and in opposition to this very ambitious but very narcissistic, sort of self-righteous cleric that was going to be the prophet, basically self-declared. But Brutha is, of course, the actual prophet because Am's actually talking to him. And so the whole cycle sort of plays out, and Brutha eventually becomes the true prophet. Is able to manipulate an eagle into a physical miracle and reinstantiate himself as a believed god. And Brutha uses his position essentially inflict constitutional requirements on his god and actually create the sorts of gods that we're used to, where will not be present, will not be continually interfering, will actually be a sort of a symbol and an article of faith and something that functions in that fashion. It's this sort of perfectly backwards, but therefore perfectly mirrored sort of Catholic story that both makes fun and makes importance of what is there. It's quite incredible, and it's all really hilarious.
I'm gonna check it out. All right, Small Gods. I'll give it another shot, because now with that intro, I think it'll help me get in there. Sometimes it just doesn't work out the first couple times. Even sometimes I've tried like 3 or 4 times, and then finally I'll get into the book like maybe the fifth time. But that was good. That was a good intro. Okay, so now sitting at a desk all day, we can't just, nobody can do this, right? And still have energy. So what do you do for fitness? How do you stay healthy so that you feel like you have energy?
Well, I wouldn't say that I stay healthy. That would be quite the stretch. Stretch is, in fact, one of my major things. Stretch and balance. I have ridiculously bad knees, unfortunately. The first time I pulled up lame, we were crossing the mall from the National History Museum to the Air and Space Museum, and I think I was 6 at the time. And that's when we found out that the crepitus in my knees was worse than the crepitus in my mother's knees. I've spent several months of my life on crutches, from, in one case, a fairly severe ankle injury, but mostly simply because my knees twisted out of joint. I have actually literally lost count of how many times my knees have dislocated. And for, at this point, about a decade, I can actually now walk off a knee dislocation, which sounds insane, but it's something that I have done half a dozen times in the last 10 years.
How does that work? So your knee is tweaked. It's dislocated. How do you
No,
know it's
no.
dislocated?
So when the top, when like when the femur keeps going sideways, there's this wet grinding noise that happens as a knee bends sideways. If you've ever heard it, you'll never forget it again. It's horrible. It also doesn't feel very good if it happens to you. It's quite painful. Well, I sit up, get the knee straightened out properly, and let it rest for 5 to 10 minutes, while I continue my physical therapy. I had knee surgery when I was about 25, and I had to do physical therapy. I had the meniscus tear turn inside, and so the knee had locked. So they had to slice off that bit so that the knee could go again. I had to undergo physical therapy where they taught me that, thanks to how loose my ligaments are, the muscle that normally holds people's kneecap in place doesn't tense properly when I walk. And so I consciously tense it every single time I take a step. And I've been doing that for close to a quarter of a century now. I go through those tensioning exercises and do some sort of light guidance massage, sort of feel the whole thing, feel the knee back into its proper places. And then once it's very clearly in and going, it's free range of motion, very slowly, very smoothly, just getting it right on. That takes about half an hour. At that point, I can stand up, and I get balance set, and then very consciously, very smoothly, very slowly, I I sort of walk pace, not on my ordinary stride, but on the stride that's appropriate, and I do that for about 15 minutes, and after that I can walk.
So it just happens suddenly. Like you're walking, you're tensing your knee because you're aware
At this
that.
point, it generally takes some kind of interference. So I'd have had to misstep and slip, and then have something go go sideways, literally. Um, but
Just
if
like with ice outside, or like it's wet outside, or
that those would be instances, yes, it can occur if I walk very great distances, which is not something I've done in recent years, but it happens sometimes. I get a little restless. Um, I'll get tired enough that I'll start feeling the knee going. I had an incident that didn't rise to that level several years ago. I was at a cousin's wedding, which it was an international affair. She had friends from Ireland that were setting up Irish dancing, so I was brought in to dance reels. And at the time, I actually weighed about 50 pounds more than I do right now because I was recovering from a, a semi-botched hernia surgery. And while I didn't dislocate the knee during the course of doing that, when I woke up the following morning, my knee had swelled to about 3 times its ordinary size. And so I was in France. I basically hobbled. I can basically walk on either leg without the other one's help if I absolutely have to. Because again, I've been doing that for multiple decades at this point. So I went out and got ibuprofen at the local drugstore. Got back, downed about 1,200 milligrams of ibuprofen, and bundled my knee in ice and kept that up for a couple days before leaving, and then had to acquire a brace that can kind of push the kneecap back, because I managed to get most of the swelling down, but it wouldn't fully heal on its own because the kneecap was basically jammed out of place.
How did you get it back into place?
So there's commercially available, not particularly expensive knee braces that have a sort of strap on them that you can that helps keep people's kneecaps in proper location. So a doctor prescribed this for me, and you don't need the prescription; you can just buy them. But said this is, with how loosely ligamented you are. He took my lower leg, so he was holding my knee and he was holding my ankle, and he was able to move my ankle back and forth roughly 3 or 4 inches without moving my knee, which is not how human legs are supposed to work. But that was the healthy leg that he could do that to. I'm not really put solidly together. So as it happens, if you push bone over in my body, it will get pushed over because nothing will stop it from happening. And by pushing the kneecap back and holding it where it was supposed to go, the knee was able to fully heal and unswell.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you pushed it back into place. You used, ice, and you used the strap, and the doctor helped to, and then the swelling went down, the knees back in place. What about those? So I heard, like you're saying, like you have loose ligaments. Like, is there a treatment that you do for that? Is there a way that you can, I don't know, tighten ligaments, or is that?
Not that I'm aware of. So balance is the single most important thing for me. And so I've got one of those inflatable yoga balls, and I do exercises where I stand on it and do squats while standing on it. And those sorts of, that's the kind of exercise that I engage in.
So is it the half ball, or is it the
It's the full ball.
feet?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you stand on it, so it's a balancing act while
Right.
you're standing on it and you're doing the squats at the same time. Okay, that I would probably fall if I tried that.
You could work your way up to it. When I was originally doing it, I started sitting and kneeling on the ball and doing that, and then that became quite easy. And I eventually got to the point where I could stand up on the ball without access to the things. But that is dangerous, and so these days I put in a sort of pull-up bar. Not that I'm really physically capable of doing pull-ups. I've never had much upper body development, and I have plenty of lower body development. Plus, I'm overweight, but I can use that bar to physically stabilize myself while getting into balance position, and then go down to fingertip, and then you take the fingertip off, and then you're good to go. But then you've got kind of a safety there, so I can't fall.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, I think there's a number of like devices that sort of, allow you to work this, like your core, and like help with your legs the way that I understand these that you standing on the ball would do. Like I saw one that was like a skateboard, and it has like
I've experienced these things in various physical therapy. The physical therapists have a real field day with me because my balance is so incredibly good. When I was in recovery from the hernia surgery, they had me on one of those sort of half ball things you were talking about. It was a platform with sort of a hard ball underneath of it. I would stand on that and juggle medicine balls for 10 minutes as part of the warm up. They needed to basically completely tire out all of my sort of major muscle groups in order to actually be able to get the real stuff to actually work, because my balance was so good that the what they're ordinarily going after with abductor and those types of muscles is stabilization, and most people don't have particularly good balance, and so when you put them in an awkward position, they have to access these muscles constantly in order to stabilize themselves and get them up. But I can take either one of my knees and sort of draw it up to waist height and just stay there for minutes and minutes on end with no particular issues whatsoever. And so they had to put me in these sort of ridiculous positions to get my heavy muscles tired enough to start vibrating so that I wouldn't be able to be stable in these other positions that would then allow these stabilization muscles to activate.
That's an interesting superpower to have. That you're a balanced super balancer.
It's not really a superpower, it's an acquisition. So again, Charlottesville's where I grew up, and as I mentioned, it was much more rural when I was a child. And so there was a creek that ran behind my house and a large wooded area that was in front of my house. And I actually had to cross the creek to get to school. And so there was an exposed sewer pipe, and or a exposed set of root limbs, and then a downed tree were the three major ways to get across the creek. And so I would basically sort of walk a balance beam twice a day, minimum every day that I went to school. And in my sort of off time, I was just playing around in these locations where I would be balancing along these kind of ridiculous, things as essentially a game. And so that ongoing training, it was a part of my life from a very young age.
That's fun. That's a lot of fun. Um, so let's do the like speed round slash pay it forward part of the podcast, where you like give advice, either to others, or like people who are coming up, or even to your younger self, right? So in terms of like, we'll go through the four F's again. So in terms of like finance for your life, like what are like a couple of the top takeaways, what you've learned like in the world of finance that have helped you the most in your life, that you would like definitely be telling your younger self?
Well, savings has always been a big part of my life, and I can recommend that to anybody. Save a lot. But I'm afraid that I had too much deference for the institutions that our world is built out of. Um, I always felt that their sort of long-term historical viability led to sort of long-term future viability. And uh, since learning about math and algorithms, and particularly how surprising the discoveries in that zone were, I would advise the youth of today to seek to build lives outside of the institutions that have respect or history, because I don't expect those to last over the lifetimes of the youth of today.
So like an actionable thing that they could do, like a tactic. Like what are some tactics that could go
Well,
along with
that gets difficult. I mean, I can of course toot my own horn. CDM markets actually look like they could work. In terms of your actual day to day, try to form relationships that are also financial as part of your cultural network outside of the the framework of the credit and financial system, because they do not have your best interests at heart, because they no longer have any interests at heart.
that? Nice. And then so for family, like you're a loner, and it sounds like you're enjoying that, but you also host, family gatherings, and you attend family gatherings. So you do have like family connections that you're enjoying, is what it sounds like to me. So what would you tell your, like your younger self, to give them the best advice in terms of, having the most, fulfilling family?
I don't know what could conceivably break through my younger self. I'm a little thick-headed. Again, for the youth of today, family formation is going to be the most, if not the only important thing that you do in your life for, 99.99% of people. And so everything that you put ahead of that is just foolishness.
Yeah. So you've, as you said, you didn't create more family, but you grew up in a really big family already.
I did, yes. And my lonerishness is to some extent physiologically based. My preferences for environment are really different from what human beings generally prefer. I like it to be a lot colder than people usually prefer it to be, and my actual superpower is I have a hypersensitive olfactory, so I find many of the foods and pleasant environments like roses. I can't be within like a dozen feet of a rose bush without practically hacking up a lung. So I find myself physically repelled by the places that people find congenial to be in. But even so, I can sense the importance of connection and so on. And the family I was born with more or less have to accept me. But for everybody else, unless you're going to make some kind of Einsteinian breakthrough, there's literally nothing you're going to do in your life that's as valuable as having a family. And so if you're only going to become the greatest sports figure that ever lived, that's not really worth it by comparison.
Yeah. 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 I agree. And all right, let's talk about fun. So you have several hobbies that we talked about. What would you tell your younger self, like, about fun, so that you can optimize for fun in your life?
Well, I think I think fun gets a bad rap. I think I think fun should be a larger part of what drives us, and playing at things produces so much more in the long term than grinding them does. And so I've been pretty dedicated to that notion for quite some time. I, for example, have believed from early childhood that studying for tests is immoral. You should you should take tests essentially with the knowledge that you have inculcated into yourself, so that you should be able to get basically the same score on any test you ever take at any point in your life. And I'm continue to sort of be cringingly horrified that many of the professionals I interact with don't have the knowledge that enabled them to become professionals anymore, because they only acquired it to take the test. Um, uh, so I think that's critical. Find find a find a society, or a modus vivendi that allows for a society that makes what you find fun actually, useful and valuable and worthwhile. And if you can drop me a line of what that looks like, I'll get on board right behind you.
I think that makes sense, though. You find your people, right? You find your people who enjoy have the like-minded, enjoyment, right? So you could find other people who love the books that you like, right? For example, or you know,
Well, again, like I have this kind of non-instinctive society. I remember, so I'm a huge Star Wars fan. I was 2 years old when it came out, but my aunt, who was my daily babysitter, worked at the theater that it came out at. So while I was, learning how to talk, more or less, I was watching Star Wars once or twice a day during its first run, and it's in me deep. But I've never been to a Star Wars convention, and it seems weird to me to want to associate with people based on our sort of common passion for a thing, which is very obviously not something that humans in general find to be weird, because it's very obviously what you mostly do.
I, Listen, I had a very similar experience. I grew up, and Star Wars made a huge impact. First run of it on me, and then when I went to college, I went to a college where there were a lot of Star Wars fans, and I didn't have I didn't really have energy to like celebrate Star Wars with the other people the way they were celebrating it. Although I love Star Wars too. So I wonder why that is that you and I both seem to have that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, whatever it is, that'd be my only caveat on your statement there.
Yeah, yeah. It seems like you'd want to find like-minded people who love those same movies, those same books. But I guess it really just depends. It really depends. Maybe there's a subsection of the people who like it, and they like it in a way that you can relate to them about it, as
Maybe so.
opposed to they like it in a different way and you don't relate to the way they like it.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Got to niche it down a little more. Okay. And then, so telling your younger self about fitness, what would you say to your younger self in terms of fitness in order to optimize for your best fitness?
Well, my younger self, I would have very specific instructions for. I'd get me on physical therapy much younger. I'd tell me not to walk to school on field day in 1988, which is where I tore my ankle to shreds and lost my ability to hurdle my own height, which is something I used to be able to do back when I was 13. It wasn't more just tearing the ankle. It's the fact that I actually walked to field day and then walked around field day on a torn ankle for a day and then walked back home on it. And then walked around on it for another week before seeking medical attention, because I had had so many pains in my legs and hobbling and stuff. I was just like, this is just another one.
So pay attention to injuries and get them seen by medical professionals as soon as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
And don't just override it using your willpower and force of will and say, "Oh yeah, it hurts. I can still do this though."
Right.
Listen,
Yeah.
this is something that I face as an adult still. So this is applicable.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd guess I'd go with that one. I might have avoided the sun a little bit more. I burn real easy, and I've had a few really nasty sunburns in my childhood before I learned that I actually can't go out in non-shade for any meaningful length of time, and some other things like that. And then I guess weight gain. Just don't do it.
How would you tell yourself to not do it?
Well,
Actual tactics.
yeah, I still have a hard time kind of getting back to college weight because my brain managed to hack the workaround. But my doctor, so like I mentioned before, I used to weigh about 50 pounds more than I do right now. Um, and that was a very bad run. I had double hernia surgery that then had complications. So I was very nearly, on and off bedridden for 6 months, and I blew up like a balloon. Zero physical activity. It was no good. My doctor told me that sort of crushing craving when you feel like you're gonna die if you don't put some food in your mouth is a signal that your brain makes to respond to your liver metabolizing fat. And so that's the signal that you're losing weight. And so I spent about 6 months never not feeling that. I would eat until I was hungry, basically. I was just using that as sort of a leveler. And I actually got down, I'm about 20 pounds heavier than then. I got back down to college weight, just living like that, of ignoring that first real gut punching hunger. signal, but not servicing it in the first place, I think, would have been more helpful. And what happened after I got sort of back to college weight is that it just completely vanished. And now I almost never feel it. Every once in a while, it swings out, and I'm like, oh, cool, I'm losing weight. And like my brain notices that I've noticed that I could not eat, and it's like, nope, we're going to stop telling you that you're feeling this now. So it's become much harder. It's sort of this cat and mouse game. But yeah, I think if I'd gotten ahead of it and known about that in the first place, I might have. My diet shifted a lot in college. The meal plan meant that it was sort of 3 meals a day, and I had been eating sort of 5 meals a day, but not huge ones, just like at greater frequency. And so when I shifted to college, I started eating much larger meals and less frequently, and you know, I think it developed some bad habits.
I mean, it sounds like an amazing hack, in fact, right? If you have found a way to ignore hunger or deal with it in such a way that rather than feeling it as the signal that some people interpret it as, right, where it's a signal that your liver is metabolizing fat, that your brain is giving you, and it's saying, hey, there's a alarm, 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 like we call this pain, something bad is happening, you better eat now. But translating that, right, through the guidance that you got from your doctor, translating that into something more positive, which is, yay, now we're losing weight. I think that's
Right.
very powerful. That's a very powerful hack that you gave yourself.
Yeah, well, I would say was given to me by a doctor, but I'm happy to pass it on to as many people to whom it applies, because, yeah, you don't want to drag around a spare tire all the time.
Yeah. So if people have more weight than if the doctor is letting you know, or if you are letting yourself know that you have this extra weight that you're ready to lose, by allowing yourself to feel that hunger pain, knowing that that's your liver burning fat, and it's a happy thing, as opposed to this emergency, that can really that can be a way for people to do that, what you described, to lose that weight. And so you're still doing that now, and that's still working for you.
Like I said, it kind of stopped working. My brain appears to have worked out how to reverse engineer and stop telling me about that, because it wants to eat. Damn it. Um, so I'm still struggling to find the next magic trick to get back down into the.
Okay, so now your brain doesn't give you the signal,
Yeah, like I
alarm,
said,
alarm.
it's very rare. Like sometimes I'll wake up and it'll be there, and it's like, oh great, and then it like as soon as I have the oh great thought, it vanishes instantly.
So now you're back to calorie counting.
Now I'm back to trying to find some other way to just make fun drive good behavior. And again, if somebody else out there has the answer, reach out, let me know.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Noah. I really appreciate your time today. I think you've really shared a lot of really valuable, the work that you do, and then the insights from the different areas of your life. It's been a real gift. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me here. This was a great conversation.
Absolutely. All right. Take care. See you next time.